Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 974. My opponent started off here with d4. I went with knight f6, hoping to get a Nimzo-Indian position against the queen's gambit move here, c4, the normal continuation. But instead he goes knight to c3. This is a very interesting move. Let's see, let's go ahead and put on my next board. You see d5 is the main response, and it's often a good idea if your opponent is playing something you don't recognize just to put those pawns in the center and play solidly. And here I think it's the best response. And now white has a number of continuations here. There's bishop g5, which he played in the game, the Richter-Veresov attack. There's bishop f4, the Jobava attack. And there's even e4 here, which would transpose into the Black-Mardimer gambit. So a lot of interesting moves that can be played here. Anyway, my opponent chose bishop g5, and then I played the simple move e6. I think I recommended this in my video that I did about how to play against d4 sidelines with black. And it's a solid move, so that's part of why I wanted to review this game in a postmortem, part of why I included it in spite of the number of mistakes I made. I just wanted to make sure this was still a sound way of playing. Also, I did a video about the Richter-Veresov attack as well. And, knight bd7 may technically be the best move here, but you're going to follow up with e6 typically anyway. So there's nothing wrong with the move e6. It's just that this move knight b5, I wondered, is this some kind of refutation to my line? But this move is actually a mistake. Let's see, we're just out of the book at this point, so let's look at it from this point of view. There is a kind of threat here. If white takes the knight and you take back with the queen, then this knight will come in here and take the c7 pawn and fork the king and the rook. So you have to deal with this, and there's no way to avoid pawn damage. So white does get something out of this. But it turns out this resulting position, let's see, he takes now. I can't take with the queen, as I explained, so I take with the pawn, and the knight drops back. So the move I played, a6, in the game was actually the best way to respond to this opening sequence. And after the knight retreats, then black is just better here. So it really was a mistake, a bit of a waste of time and giving me the bishop pair, in spite of the fact that it's inflicted some pawn damage over here on the king side. It seems like black's position is just fine here, and it's an advantage to black, in fact. So I can't really recommend white's line of play, but it was interesting to see it, and it's good to know that the way I played was the way to refute it. So right here, the best continuation is to continue with c5. And let's see, white might go e3. Then you would take and play knight c6. You would take with a pawn rather than the queen to avoid losing a tempo here. And notice the queen here is looking at that pawn, but it's defended by my queen. So anyway, this is a reasonable continuation, leaves an advantage to black. Then the move I played, knight c6, blocks the c-pawn, and so actually, at this point, white's play is justified, and it's probably in the range of about even. We go back and forth here. I'm not going to comment on every little move. We'll just look at the big ones. Let's see. He played a3. I will say a3 is a slow move. He should probably just do normal development. I went to bishop d7. He went e3. And I went queen e7. And queen e7 is the start of a plan which is completely mistaken, and maybe a slight mistake in its own right. I'm trying to get in the move e5, which is a logical plan here. I just have to find the right sequence of moves to accomplish that. And the chess engine recommends playing like this. Knight to e7. Does two things. Defends the e-pawn so I can push the d-pawn without losing, defends the d-pawn so I can push the e-pawn without losing that d-pawn, and at the same time it opens up the c-file so I can push the c-pawn forward again. So let's see, he plays normally with knight to f3. I would go bishop g7 here, get some more force on the e5 square. He might play queen d2, preparing to castle queenside perhaps, and then I could push on with e5. So it's possible to get in that e5 move. I just have to find the right sequence of moves to do it. And queen e7 was not the right move. Let's see, he continued with knight f3, and I played e5 anyway. I just forgot that, or failed to notice that this pawn on d5 was not defended. So, you know, that is one of the advantages of playing these offbeat lines, the ones that start with knight c3. I mean, you need to play them correctly, so I can't recommend that knight b5 move. But the fact that the knight is here putting some pressure on the center, it leads to different tactics than what your opponent might be used to, and can give you some advantages, particularly in a blitz game where your opponent doesn't have time to think so long about each move. So, you know, it's fun to play these offbeat openings, I think. Okay, so by now, white is just winning. I've given up that pawn, and I have to move my queen again. I have to be careful to hold on to the f-pawn here. Let's see, he takes, and I took with the f-pawn, and this actually is a blunder, which neither of us spotted the reason why it's a blunder. So if you want to take a look at this position, see if you can figure out what the best follow-up is for white. There's only one best move here. There's a lot of good moves, but only one best move. Okay, yeah, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. The best move here is to follow up with knight to g5. That was the problem when I played f takes e. The f-pawn is no longer here guarding that square, and this knight gets to hop into a great square. It's looking at e6, so I can't play bishop e6, or if I do, it gets traded off, giving up one of my advantages in this position is I still have the bishop pair. And I can't castle here because he's looking at the f-pawn there, so it prevents me from castling. Let's see, and the move I want to play is f6 to chase the knight away, but that loses immediately to queen h5 check. So let's see, after knight g5, my best move here is bishop to g7, or at least this is one of the lines recommended by the chess engine. Then he can bring his queen out with tempo, threatening on f7, and have to play bishop e6 anyway to defend, so he can grab the bishop pair here at least. So anyway, death and destruction. I mean, take the bishop pair away from me is what I mean. So that's a bad position for me. So f takes e5 was a mistake. For better or worse, I really needed to take with the knight here. Didn't particularly want to do that, but it was necessary in this case. Okay, but he missed that and played bishop c4. So we both missed it, and so now he's back to where he is still winning, but not immediately. It's just a pawn up and a good position too. He's got two advantages there. Probably enough to win with good play. So I continued with bishop h6. He castled. I castle. And then he finds this nice move, knight to b6. It's a check. I can't take it because my queen would be hanging. So I have to move my king. And then he can trade queens and go for this endgame. Although it's not necessarily a simple endgame. But that's what he chose to go for. And the chess engine, you know, I can't criticize that approach because the chess engine recommends that way of playing as one of the best moves. So top engine choice there. And then he took here. I wasn't so sure about that. I thought he should have played bishop takes f7, just grab a second pawn. That's what I would have played in this position. But the chess engine isn't as impressed. Let's see. I would save the bishop, so I would get to keep the bishop pair in this line. Let's see. But he could bring his bishop back to d5. I would play king c7, attacking his knight, and the knight would run away to a4. And well, the chess engine rates this line about as good as the line he played. So even though he's 2 pawns up, I guess I've managed to activate my pieces some and push his pieces back. So whereas in the other line, he's only 1 pawn up, but his pieces stay active. So this is just as good for white as the other line. So white still has an advantage of about +2 here in the chess engine's estimation. And he should probably continue with this bishop d5 move. We saw that in the other line. It's a good move. preventing me from moving my pawns forward and maybe preparing to take off that knight, if the situation should demand. Instead, he went with this pawn attack. These pawn storms are not as effective when the queens aren't on the board. He does kind of want to open up lines towards my king, but his style of play would be better. He would be better not having traded queens if he wanted to play this way. Anyway, this keeps an advantage, but it's not the best move. And so gradually I'm getting back into the game. Let's see, I play d5, kick his bishop back. Let's see, he throws in b5 here, and I move my knight. The chess engine says, why not just take here? Thinks this is fine, and then play f6. F6 defending the d-pawn. One of the things I was overlooking at this point, having overlooked the threat to defending the e-pawn. Yeah, earlier in the game I overlooked the threat to the d-pawn. Now I'm overlooking the threat to the e-pawn, because the way I played it, after he pushed that pawn forward, I moved my knight away. His bishop is still hanging, so he can't, I don't know, maybe he could grab there immediately because my rook would be hanging. But, well, there's nothing wrong with bishop e2. And then I played rook to c8, and that gives up a second pawn here because he can just take that. So instead of rook c8, I should defend it with bishop g7. That was the recommended move. Anyway, I played rook c8, and he gets another pawn here. Played rook e7. So 2 pawn blunders in this game. Normally enough to really lose the game. But he makes a mistake here. He puts his knight back on g4. It's not the best square for the knight. If he just drops his knight back to f3, he can give up this c-pawn. I mean, that's what I was doing with rook c8, was I was threatening to take his c-pawn. But he can get a pawn back this way and just stay 2 pawns up when I move the rook. So all of that seems to be fine. But he had a different idea for the bishop. And this knight g4, it's with tempo, so there's a logic here. But I can move my bishop with tempo, and then he has to move his rook. And so right here there's a tactic. So here's your second chance. The last quiz was kind of complicated, but this one is simple. What's the best move for black here? You should be able to find this one, so if you haven't spotted it yet, go ahead and pause the video and think about it till you see it. I'm going to give the answer away now. The answer is h5. And then where is that knight going? That's why this knight on g4 wasn't so well placed. Can't go back to any of these squares, and it can't go forward to any of these squares after he kicked my bishop to this good diagonal. Now it's covering all of the escape squares of the knight. So that knight vulnerability was there for the next few moves. And it shows up even a few moves down the line. So both of us were overlooking that tactic, but there it is. Anyway, so I took the pawn here, which is fine. He went bishop to f3. He should probably go bishop to d3 there. The chess engine likes bishop d3, say rook to c5, bishop takes a6, oh, pawn takes a6, and then giving up the knight, but getting a bunch of pawns, and actually still with a slight edge to white. After bishop f3, if I had played this h5 move, I would have had the advantage here. But like I said, neither of us saw this, so I took the pawn here. That was my mistake, taking the pawn instead of playing h5. Let's see, he took here. I went knight to c4. At this point, he's starting to make an escape square for his knight. Let's see, he played rook takes b5, played knight takes a3, so we're just doing a little bit of pawn grubbing here, and then he dropped his rook back to b3. Actually, since I missed my opportunity to trap his knight, or to take his knight, he has an advantage here, and the way for him to keep that advantage is to play rook to h5. That stops me from playing h5 myself, and also threatens to round up that pawn. So that's how he should play here. So rook b3 is a mistake, and let's see, I went here with knight c4, and he went rook fb1, and this is the final mistake. And then once again, there's only one really strong move here for black, but at least this time I found it. It's going for the fork, so it's kind of obvious from that point of view, but you also have to calculate this sequence, what happens if he takes on b7. Now, in fact, the best move here is for him to back off and play bishop to d1, gain a tempo with the bishop to kick my rook back. So the rook drops back with c6, and then playing h3 to save the knight. And so that gives up the exchange, but he still has a better pawn structure, and well, this would still be a game. I think black is slightly better in this position, but still playable. And it all comes down to that the fact that his knight was still trapped there. And when he moved the rook away, then his knight once again had no squares to run to. Well, maybe it still had no squares to run to because my bishop and my rook were coordinating on that square. So yeah, the knight trap was sitting there all the time, and he had to waste a move with h3, and so I get to round up those pieces, or round up the exchange anyway. But instead he continued with his plan, which was kind of logical. He piled up all his pieces on the lone pawn remaining in front of my king, and he can overpower me here, but I have too many counter threats. So he took, I took back, he took, and I just played king c8, and then he resigned because he has no move in this position. So let's look at all the threats that black has. First of all, I don't know if this is any particular order, but one threat is to take the knight with check. Take the bishop with check. So knight takes bishop check, either moves the king or takes back. He has to take back, actually, to not get mated. Then I win the rook. So that just clearly wins a whole rook. The second threat is rook here, checkmate. And so to defend against that, he really needs to bring the rook back here. But then once again, I can take it. And then the third threat is to is this the knight trap. The knight is still trapped there, so he can't deal with all of these threats. H3 looks like a try. It gives the king an escape square, and it gives the knight an escape square. Although I guess I could drive the knight back and then checkmate him, but also I could take this piece with check and then take the rook. So anyway, it's just a hopeless position and kind of an interesting collection of tactics hanging over white's head here. Anyway, one other comment I wanted to make about my play in this game. In spite of the blunders that I made during the game, I have to say one good thing about the way I played was I didn't get overly excited. Right? Sometimes, you get all angry and frustrated because you're making so many mistakes, and that just leads to more mistakes. But in general, in spite of the fact that I missed those pawn moves, I was keeping my cool and just looking for those opportunities. I didn't spot them all, but I did spot the critical one at the end. And so, if you can just keep the game going and keep your cool, look for your opponent's mistakes and look for ways to exploit them. Sometimes you can turn a game around like that. Okay, anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you next time. Bye.